Coloring Crypto.
Welcome to Coloring Crypto. I'm your host, Gabe Colors. Today we have Eric Lee, the co-founder of LinkedIn, who also has a current company, Presdo, and a blockchain company called Hub. It's been a crazy week with the prices of cryptocurrency. There's all kinds of ideas out there of why the price has been dropping so much. It was due. The bubble popped. Facebook recently banned all cryptocurrency-related ads. China seems to have done something similar with word that crypto ads have stopped appearing on Chinese search engines. Either way, it's important to remember that Bitcoin is still higher than it was just 3 months ago. And even more importantly, Coloring Crypto does not offer financial advice. This is just our observations. As a co-founder of LinkedIn, with a background in computer science from Stanford, you've been thinking about sort of systems and networks for a long time. Now you've got a new company leveraging the blockchain. Tell us how your background in computer science and experience with social networks helped to shape your unique understanding of how the blockchain works and what opportunities are here.
Yeah. So if I may, I'll just start with, just kind of my, insight into blockchain and what really kind of fundamentally piqued my interest and how that led to, what I see with it in terms of how it can help with, social networking and many other kind of social interactions on the internet today. So blockchain itself is actually, it's a pretty simple idea, but it's a pretty powerful idea at its core. So the idea of blockchain is you have basically a ledger, which is kind of just a database. But there's one very special thing about this kind of database is that it is a chain. So every new record that you're adding onto the blockchain relies on the previous one. It's signed with a hash that includes the previous one, which means that as you're adding more blocks to the chain, every new block depends on the previous one, and going all the way back to the first block or the Genesis block. And the power of that is that it's basically tamper-proof. The community likes to say that it's immutable, but that's what gives its power. And it's immutable because of all of the advances in cryptography over the last several decades in computer science. So it really uses all those concepts in a really great way. But because it's immutable, it's trustable, right? You can't tamper with it. You can't change it after the fact. Some of the information that got recorded in the blockchain, and that is really the fundamental reason I believe that gave rise to cryptocurrencies. Finally, you have a basis of trust for exchanging currencies. And then furthermore, what's interesting is this whole discussion of exchange of value. And so currency is a value, for sure. It's probably the most concrete example of value, but there are many other kinds of value as well. And so just on the basis of the immutability, you can use the blockchain then to represent value of all different kinds. And then add on to that this whole concept of distribution or decentralization. And now you get something that really can't be tampered with even more. And what I saw based on just my experience with social networking was that there were starting to be many, many different kinds of breakdowns in the way that people interact with each other on the internet. And a lot of those problems had to do with a lack of trust between people who are either sharing information or engaging in commerce types of activities with each other. And so I said, wow, if blockchain is a secure platform for the exchange of value, then there's certainly something that we can do around social networks and instilling that sense of trust as people are trying to interact with one another using these digital tools.
If you were to go back in time and visit your former self back in college studying computer science and describe to that previous self the blockchain, how much Or how familiar would those concepts be?
I think the components, were there. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things about computer science is that it really is about how creative you are in putting the component pieces together. So back 20 years when I was in school, a lot of these concepts did already exist. They already, of course, in the intervening 20 years, they've been advanced, but the fundamental concepts were there. But the ingenious thing about blockchain was the way that these concepts or these tools were put together. Basically, it was a very clever design. Wonders whether it was one person who came up with the idea. In this case, Bitcoin, which really got the ball rolling, or actually a group of people who put this idea together. But it was very clever in the way it was assembled by the selection of tools and concepts that kind of made this technology make sense all of a sudden.
What do you think were the sort of converging forces or ideas out there that had Bitcoin happen in 2008? Like, why didn't it happen 10 years previously or 10 years later?
Yeah, great question. So some of the key concepts, definitely have to do with cryptography. That's a, big part of it. I think also, in the last 20 years or so in the evolution of the commercial internet, we've learned, as humans that it's a valuable medium for interacting with each other. And so until those use cases got developed, there wasn't sort of much use for some of these concepts to be relevant for a large population. So when you have cryptography, when you have basically the ability to store information digitally and allow lots of people to access it, when you have the desire to do commerce online between people or companies, and then also this whole idea around distributed computing, which had existed for a long time, but I think more recently became valuable because of the centralization of the internet as we have seen it happen over the last 10 years or so of development. So the internet was really conceived as originally a decentralized network of computers and systems. And what's happened is that over the last 10 years, really, power and data has been centralized in a variety of different, very powerful, companies. And there's been a sense in which going back to the original principles of the internet, this kind of decentralized set of systems that are very robust. You can't shoot a missile at it and take it down. You can't shut down one node of it and shut down the whole thing. And that appeals to a lot of people, and it actually makes sense as the long-term architecture of what the internet should be. So blockchain really is kind of a return to those original ideas around the internet, and that's what has a lot of people excited.
What was the conversation like when you and your colleagues were starting LinkedIn around centralization and decentralization?
It wasn't an issue, it wasn't a topic in the forefront of our minds. We were just trying to build a useful system. And I think it just so happened that the way that the world was structured then and now led to centralized systems, right? So the corporation, the profit, motive, I think that has consequences for how you organize platforms, on the internet, and how you organize data and who owns that data, what you can do with that data. Data is certainly, powerful and valuable. And so we were just trying to get a system going, but I think unintended consequence perhaps was that the data became very, very valuable, and it became owned by entities that if they had the data, were very valuable in themselves. And so that's what happened.
Could you sort of explain for someone who's not so technical, like a specific core aspect of the blockchain or cryptocurrency that makes it work?
I would like to take a stab at proof of work and why that was an original concept for Bitcoin. Proof of work gets mentioned a lot. It's definitely the consensus algorithm for the way that Bitcoin works. So the whole idea around a decentralized system like Bitcoin is that you can have lots of servers around the world, and it's a very robust architecture that nobody owns, but basically works by itself and works according to the design of the people who came up with the idea. And so when you have all these different computers that can be accepting transaction requests, which is in this case the transfer of Bitcoin from one party to another, you have to resolve conflicts. And everybody has to, all the computers have to have basically the same version of the truth as everybody else. And so this is basically what this concept of consensus means. And the method for doing that is the so-called consensus algorithm.
I was just going to say, while we're on proof of work, let's contrast that to proof of stake and any other sort of methods out there.
Yeah, and there's some hybrid approaches that are starting to emerge, hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. And then there's also another concept called proof of authority, which basically kind of delegates the consensus to, some kind of oracle to resolve conflicts. One of the problems of these decentralized systems is that you have the possibility of collusion, where basically bad actors can decide that they will do things in their own way and change the truth to their benefit. So in the case of Bitcoin, they can basically steal Bitcoin and reverse transactions and things like that. And so the reason for proof of work is actually just to guard against this. So the idea is that there is not enough concentrated computing power that the bad actors in the world can amass to take things in their own undesirable direction.
How often in your life, whether either personal or business, are you interacting with folks that are still new to the blockchain?
Well, it's still very new. I was just talking to an investor yesterday and asking him the same question, in terms of to what level of understanding do investors, have about blockchain? And I would say that we're still in the early days of this. And there are different levels of understanding, from I heard of this, I don't understand it, to something interesting is happening, but I don't know what's going to unfold. And so there are various levels of understanding. I would say we're still very early on in terms of the understanding and appreciation of the value of this technology.
I had a guest, Crystal Rose with Sensei, on, who described the blockchain as Internet 3.0. And I'm curious, with your experience being around in the .com days, what's your sense of how far, in terms of what will become of the blockchain and kind of like the uses and the ideas that will be around in 5 or 10 years, how far along do you think we are in terms of seeing what those applications are?
We're pretty early on. Really, where I would say is that some of the fundamental challenges of blockchain and blockchain technology are still being worked on. Usually when you have a new ecosystem, which, this is, there are layers of technology development, right? You start with the kind of fundamental layers of technology. In the internet, it would have been things like TCP/IP, which is very low level. And on the next layer, you might have something like SMTP, which is kind of the mail protocol to allow you to build email applications. And then on top of that, on the internet, to use the internet analogy, on top of SMTP, you would have mail applications, things like Outlook or the mail app on your iPhone. And so there are these kind of layers. And so on blockchain, we're still kind of at that, working out the technology at the pretty fundamental layer in terms of just getting many of the basic issues around performance, scalability, inter-blockchain interactions. I think there's still quite a bit of security challenges to fix or to at least improve. So we're still working on that. And so that's really important to do. But, the next layer is sort of these kind of middleware types of protocols like email, that promise to start to make things more useful and enable, certain classes of applications to exist. So we're still in the early days. I would say that, again, to draw a comparison with the internet, I'm still very interested to look for that company that can kind of be the Netscape, if you will, of the blockchain. This is a type of company that will come along and say, look, the tools today are still really raw, but we're going to really help improve it. And more than that, we're going to really support them and enable real world use cases to happen using this technology.
you are the founder and CEO of Presdo, and then there's also a blockchain, and I'm not sure if it's a different company or a product. Can you talk about Presdo and then your sort of your blockchain hub project?
Yeah, so Presto is really this conference social networking system that we built to enable events to kind of create communities around all of the attendees and to facilitate really interesting interactions at events. And we just found it fascinating because people are there with an intent, they're there with a purpose, and they really want to make the most out of their time. They usually have spent some significant resources besides their time to get to the conference. And so it's really valuable time for them. So we made a business out of it. It became pretty successful, and we're still working on it. But what we learned was that there were ways for people to connect beyond just the people that they knew. And this was especially a large use case in the conference context. You usually have people who are from different organizations. They're there mainly to offer their company's products or services, or at least to build visibility around their company. And so you have a very different kind of interaction pattern where it's not about keeping up with your friends or family or even your professional contacts, people you know, but trying to discover who it is that you should be able to connect with and engagement with those people who you don't know. And so that use case actually led to what we're doing in a project which is still out of the company called Hub, which is to basically extend that idea around how essentially strangers who are interacting on the internet, how they can have a sense of trust for those who they're interacting with.
What's the benefit of bringing this to the blockchain?
I would flip that around and say that what is the benefit of trust, and why does the blockchain add to it? And so we believe that trust is really kind of the fundamental basis for interaction between people, especially those who don't know each other on the internet. Trust really creates economic opportunity. It creates economic velocity. And so I look at the internet as a giant pipe where people can interact with each other. And so, trust is a really fundamental component of that. And so previously, without blockchain, you really couldn't do it. You couldn't do it well. I think one of the problems that exists today is that there is reputation data for sure on the internet, but it's locked by these centralized owners and not really owned or controlled by the individual who the data represents. And so you have all these kind of perverse incentives, basically, where companies are essentially profiting from the users, and the users are certainly the product.
Can you share any examples as you and your team are putting this together of surprises or challenges?
Just going back to that analogy of the internet where things are built in layers, we ourselves are not trying to, build a better blockchain. We're trying to build kind of a use case using blockchain technology. And I think one of the things that we've discovered is that it is a challenge. The technology is still improving and evolving quite quickly. There are many different alternatives. And so we're essentially, I think one of the things that we like to say at LinkedIn was that we're driving the car while we're building the car. And that's a kind of a risky thing to do. But that same situation is happening here, where we're, trying to drive this car, and the car is being, put together and being worked on, and pieces are being swapped out and so forth, while we're trying to drive it. So that creates some challenges for sure. Having done it before, we know it's definitely possible. So just have to kind of plan for it and make sure that you anticipate places in the car where you have to kind of swap things out, that you're ready for that.
What would be a leap in the overall sort of blockchain technology that would really elevate your ability to execute on your project and really kind of like help the entire industry?
Yeah, I think the one super clear one is just around scalability. Today, the popular blockchain platforms are rather slow in terms of how many transactions they can do per second. CryptoKitties is just that app alone really is causing Ethereum to bottlenecks. It can't be that case. The types of scenarios that we're seeing is orders of magnitude higher transaction rates than what even Ethereum can do today. And that's true for a lot of different applications that are being envisioned for blockchain. So I think anonymity is great. It's a desirable aspect. But there's probably, in the context of controlling how tokens are transferred, there certainly is the possibility of a fraud. It happens all too often. And so I think we really need to kind of lock down on the security of the systems to make it a safe place for people to store their value and to transact with it.
Are you versed well enough in Plasma and Lightning just to give some of our new listeners a sense of what those are?
They're both kind of based on a similar concept, which is that the transaction rate of either Bitcoin or Ethereum is limited to a certain extent. It's always going to be inherently limited to a certain extent. It can only go as fast as it's designed to do, and you can't really make it go that much faster. And yet the requirements on the transaction rates are much higher than the limitations. And so the approach that these protocol takes is to basically invest in a what's basically a side chain system. So it's not on the main chain. It's just something off to the side. It's basically a hierarchy of chains, if you will, where transactions can happen at a more local level, and there's basically a roll up from the local chains to higher and higher levels of the hierarchy until the hashes gets recorded on the main chain, which represent all of the transactions that are happening at the lower levels. And so in that way, people can be interacting on these systems at a more local level and still preserve the truth on the main chain. So it's a good approach. It's a solid and common computer science pattern, and it's being applied in these systems, and it should work. Of course, there's a lot of devils in the details. I think that's why it's still under development. But the basic idea of how it scales, how these systems scales, makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one of the challenges for me, I mean, for a lot of people who are new to cryptocurrency, is sort of I'll scroll through my Facebook feed and I'll see these really strong opinions. In particular, I think I saw one from Roger Ver with Bitcoin Cash saying that the Lightning Network was going to centralize everything and make banks become these hubs. And I'm curious, if you have any thoughts on that in particular. But how do you separate the signal from the noise?
I'm not sure that I know. I mean, there is so much information coming out every day and from many different sources. It is really a dynamic place where a lot of people are contributing. Some ideas will turn out to work, and some ideas will turn out not to work. And it can come from many different quarters, right? And that's the nature of innovation, where not necessarily the experts know everything or can predict everything. And certainly the novices, they can come up with something brilliant, but maybe there's also a lot of experimentation and unsuccessful attempts.
What do you find for yourself? Like, what are your best resources as you're tackling some of these problems?
Yeah, what's interesting is that there are a few websites that I visit on a pretty religious basis, just to kind of get the news and just to stay on top of the developments. But I would say a lot of this is just practice within a community of people. So I'm we're very fortunate to have interest in our project and partners that have worked in blockchain for many more years than we have, and we just go talk to them, and sometimes they already know how to solve a problem that we are looking to solve. Sometimes we're going to them with a new problem, and so they've got to consider it and figure out how it can be solved. But hopefully together, among this kind of community, which there's certainly people here in Silicon Valley, but it's really a worldwide community.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. It does come down to people. Who do you know that knows something? Can you share the specific websites that you do go to religiously?
I read Cointelegraph and I read CoinDesk. So those are pretty well known sites. But they've got a good feed on happenings around the world. But I think the other kind of interesting thing is you also want to kind of identify the hotbeds of activity and try to make sure that whatever you're doing is relevant in those other geographies. I think this is also very exciting. Is that I think innovation used to be more of a kind of a local thing. Maybe like Silicon Valley, was a place for a lot of innovation for the .com times, but blockchain is definitely a global phenomenon. So you're working with really people all over the world in different time zones, different cultures, and I think sensitivities to different cultures and how they work is definitely part of the fun and the challenge.
Yeah, that is exciting. The sort of globalization of this all. What else are you excited about? And then maybe share some of your concerns.
So I'm excited that 5 to 10 years from now, we'll all be living in a new reality that will be powered by blockchain, and we'll have even neater use cases that are enabled that we all do and take for granted. Because it'll be so easy. In terms of concerns, I think this is just part of the path, is that there is a lot of doubt around this technology. There's a lot of hype as well. And so I hope that we just kind of get through it without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There is value in this thing, and we're one of those teams that really intends to make it valuable, create value from it. Hopefully that doesn't get lost in all of the noise that is happening around the space at the moment.
I want to give you a chance to plug your company. How do people find out more about you, or get in touch or find out more about what your company is doing?
Yeah, so we have a website called hubtoken.org. It's spelled just like it sounds. So check us out there. We also have a Telegram group by the same name, HubToken. And so we're really trying to engage with others, find partners to really look at these use cases. And so what we're all about is building a new trust layer for the internet. So yeah, get more information, and I'm on Telegram. That's probably the best way to reach me because my inbox has become quite a mess recently.
Terrific. Well, Eric, this has been very illuminating. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gabe. It's great to talk to you, and love to talk about these topics that you suggested.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this all emerges for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Coloring Crypto.
Coloring Crypto is hosted by Gabe Colors. Our audio producer is Aaron Garber. Our content producer is Dan Weiner. And our parent company is Chapin Labs. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in Coloring Crypto are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in Coloring Crypto is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice.
Subscribe now.